Throughout this film, we've covered a lengthy time span in the 1990s, and it's vital to helping understand what the problems really are and what ones will continue to lay ahead. And separate from the focus of physical cover-ups the truth movement seems only obsessed with, these crimes are still connected, even as a pre-existing systemic problem, and it shows that there is a real branch-out effect of operatives between 9/11 and 1993. That's why it's important to understand not just graphic anomalies and the atrocities of terrorist incidents committed or the pretext potentials attempted, but mainly the historical efforts of prevention by anti-terrorism task force, even if such conclusions and focus seems to emphasize the bottom end of a greater conspiracy. Most 9/11 truthers are oblivious to official narratives of these crimes, just as much as they are not realizing they've been indoctrinated in a cult conspiracy worldview, and some will even deny or doubt its popularity subjectively. And in that subversive mind frame, within what remains as a 9/11 truth movement, has been emotionally attached to, combined with still being ignorant on past and present Middle Eastern affairs, real foreign policy. They are afraid of falling under a spell of pro-war propaganda, along with being disillusioned by their fantastical expectations that they've been long misled into believing are the ulterior conspirators behind 9/11, and not bothering to investigate the validity of Al-Qaeda or Islamic terrorism as a tangent shift or trend throughout the Arab and Third World. A prime example ignored, ending the 90s era, is the Millennium Plot, as in one almost occurred during the 2000 New Year's Y2K celebration, not just up into the Canadian border with Ahmed Rassam and those linked to him in New York City and elsewhere, including later revealed in 2016 that the Saudi imam and consular to the Saudi consulate, Fahad al-Thamari, known as an intermediate in the infamous 20 Pages link, also had telephone contacts in Los Angeles of individuals suspected of helping Ahmed Rassam, as future 9/11 hijackers Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi are entering the country at LAX, later settling in San Diego. But even the other Millennium incidents are ignored and did actually take place in South Asia and the Middle East then, and since 9/11, into further escalations 4 administrations later, continuing the unending mess with the War on Terror. With the complexity of the crimes and criminals before and during 9/11, a lot of basic questions are not being asked. Such as in the early 90s, why did Osama bin Laden choose to move to Sudan in 1992 rather than return back to Afghanistan? Who is Gulbuddin Hekmatyar? And why did he become one of the first suspects for the 1993 World Trade Center bombing? Why isn't the hijacking of Air France Flight 8969 over the Christmas holiday in 1994 by the Algerian armed Islamic group not found to be linked or included to Osama bin Laden and his Al-Qaeda network, nor particularly considered to have been in concert with the planned Bojinka plot discovered 2 weeks earlier in the Philippines when the events were nearly for the same time frame, plus that the Air France 8969 hijackers' target was to crash into the Eiffel Tower? Why isn't there any effort to capture Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was alive and then dead in 2020, only to reappear alive again the following year in a 60-minute video on the 20-year anniversary of September 11th, which even after the US has pulled out of Afghanistan with the Taliban takeover of the government, al-Zawahiri still roamed free somewhere in that region, only to finally be killed a couple of months ago in July of 2022. And what about the 1980s? Was there earlier warning signs of attacking the World Trade Center back then? What was the US's approach on dealing with international terrorism? Was there ever a call for a war on terrorism then, such as the failed war on drugs? How about Europe back then? Where did Islamic terrorism exist? Was there another underground network like Al-Qaeda that predates it? Why did the 1986 West Berlin discotheque bombing happen? Was Libya really responsible?
Look hard, Marty! Who? Who do you think? The Libyans!
Isn't there something to be said about how just within less than 15 years, the US went from Muammar Gaddafi as Arab villain, then on to Saddam Hussein as Arab villain, and then Osama bin Laden, but then back to Saddam, and then back to Gaddafi, especially when Libya issued the first arrest warrant through Interpol against bin Laden on March 16, 1998, naming him the main suspect in the murder of 2 German citizens in Libya in 1994. This is all before the US issued their bin Laden arrest warrant months later for a conspiracy to attack defense utilities of the United States. How was ISIS able to manifest in Libya a decade after 9/11, while there has been an ongoing coalition with the war on terrorism? Who was Abu al-Zarqawi, often now thought to be the father of ISIS? And how did he just all of a sudden appear in Iraq, ultimately becoming another pretext for the 2003 US invasion? And why did he also behead Nick Berg? And what about the 70s? Who the hell is Carlos the Jackal? What was the Black September? What ultimately was the consequence of Munich in 1972? Why does this kind of activity go back to Germany so much? These historical questions, not only pertaining to the pre- and post-bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993, do have somewhat useful information, but they have not been thoroughly challenged within mainstream alternative conspiracy theories or within the established 9/11 truth movements when scrutinized over its popular inside job claims. In sequential contrast to 9/11 itself, when these attacks were certainly carried out on the surface definitively by a loose association of Arabs and or individuals who identify as Muslims within a conventional Al-Qaeda nexus. And even if given positions of deniability by feds doesn't make it a default reason to grant collusion accusations or suggest government conspiracies and or domestic complicity, but instead can also be more to do with neglect and compartment conflicts, as well as covering up their own mistakes. But none of those obstructions, given along with real anomalies still showing cover-ups, detracts that these crimes were not carried out by an ulterior international conspiracy. In other words, what Alex Jones has proclaimed for decades, misguided by those discredited sources that even predate him, and that the 1993 World Trade Center bombing was an inside job, or in his brand of a false flag, is utter nonsense.